GPT-4 just dropped, so let's talk about some of my thoughts around how this is going to affect the game industry, how AI in general is going to affect the video game industry. I'll start with my optimistic side, and then we'll go to my pessimistic side and talk about some of the bad things that I could see happening with this technology. One way to look at this is as a technological disruptor, and video games have had lots of technological disruptors that were feared in the moment, but ultimately ended up improving the games and the development process for the most part. So one that I remember going through was motion capture. At the time when motion capture was coming through, animators were on average very against it. They saw it as a threat to their jobs, a threat to what they were going to do. They resisted it passively, sometimes throwing their wooden shoes into the machinery. But eventually, in the end, motion capture became a tool they used to do their job. Animators didn't go away, but instead started to use motion capture as part of their suite of tools. Similarly, with photogrammetry, you go out into the world and you take a bunch of pictures. You use tools to generate models and textures out of those pictures. The level artists that I worked with seemed to embrace this technology from the get-go, but you could see why you would be afraid of it. This is going to remove or damage or eliminate the jobs that these people are doing in the creation of level. In that case, what ended up happening fairly quickly was it removed the mundane parts of the job. So the level artist could focus on the act of creating levels as opposed to the act of creating the props within the levels. And the more interesting props that don't exist in the real world were still created by hand. So you could argue that something like photogrammetry actually took a job and made it better in a lot of ways because it eliminated the mundane parts of the job and kept the more creative parts of the job. So you could imagine that things like GPT-4 and Midjourney could potentially do the same thing, where they become amplifiers for the acts of writing or image creation. I don't know exactly how that would shake out or if that's realistic, but you could certainly start with the lens of this is just a piece of technology. Like any other piece of technology, it will become a tool in the toolbox. The job will change, the job will transform, but the job won't go away. The AI image generation software right now, you can see how you could use it for various things. It's not a concept artist because its precision is so off. Sometimes your hand has 9 fingers, or you have an entire extra arm. Or when you zoom in, you realize that the skin is made up of tiny little other faces or other horrifying things that the AIs often end up doing. But what it actually is pretty good at is vibe. So if you want to take a picture and make it look spooky or make it look happy or experiment with some different feels, it can kind of be used for that. None of the resulting images are pieces of concept art. There's something before that. But there is maybe a use for them in a place like that. One place where I actually think that there's a big opportunity for AI to help from a dev perspective is in testing. Testing falls into essentially 3 kinds of buckets. There is list testing, where you're doing a lot of basically brute force kind of testing, where you're walking up against walls to make sure the collision is working, or you're making sure that all of the weapons load, or checking to make sure that there is a description attached to every single item. That seems like something that really you don't want or need a human to be doing, that a bot of some sort makes perfect sense. On the other end, you have qualitative testing, where people are testing it for feel and how does the balance come in, and does the story make any sense? You're going to want humans to do that. In fact, you probably want humans to be doing that a lot more than they're doing it right now. In the middle, you have things where you're testing to see if you can get through a plot successfully. That might be a place where there's an opportunity to supplement humans with additional resource through AI, where you have bots that have learned to play the mission or learned to play the level, and they're able to do that over and over again just to make sure that things keep running. I would hope that if you're doing that, you're not doing that in an effort to reduce your QA expense, but instead you're using it in an effort to free up those humans to do the more qualitative things and provide better feedback on the quality of the game, as opposed to just does it successfully function as a toaster. Now, the pessimistic side of me sees this potentially a different way. ChatGPT was already pretty close to being able to dump out a mediocre or even bad novel. GPT-4 will be even closer, and within a few years, there's a very good probability that these tools will be able to create mediocre or slightly better than mediocre pieces of fiction. And here's the problem that I see with that, is that you quickly reach the point where you can create something that's all right for not very much money. And if I'm a multinational corporation focused on profitability, I've now entered into a very dangerous position, because for a few $1,000s, I can generate a few thousand novels that aren't that great, but are going to sell okay. And so what you do is you really strongly run the risk of flooding the market. If you think that the long tail of discoverability is bad now, if there are suddenly tens of thousands of C- pieces of fiction flooding the marketplace, it's going to be really hard for the really good stuff to rise out of the noise. We've already seen evidence of this happening. The Hugos closed their submission because they were being flooded with AI-generated submissions. This is not a solved problem, and it's not really clear how you would solve this problem. When you put a profit motive into the mix, now you have corporations having to decide between, I can make 1,000 things, which on average will sell only a couple of hundred copies, or I can take a risk on something that might sell 10 or 20,000 copies on average. Well, in most cases, the corporation is going to choose that volume choice because it's lower risk and it's going to make them more money. Even though that isn't really pushing media forward, it's just a bunch of goo, that would be the choice that would be made. And then the other thing I would worry about is, as that happens, as the humans are pushed out of different areas, then the AIs are starting to feed on their own food. They are starting to train themselves on the content generated by their own models. And so it starts to suck out and push out creativity. You start to get into a world of ever increasingly derivative and self-referential content. Now, a lot of this assumes that the models don't actually get much better than they are right now. If they continue to get better and better, then maybe you're not just making mediocre content. Maybe you're making pretty good content. But that doesn't fix the problem. That just makes it worse. Because ultimately, these models are not doing things, are not creating art with the same goals that we have. They're not trying to spark conversations. They're not trying to make you think about things. They're just doing what they're told. So the risk of a really good AI is that it pushes all of the conversation out of all of the artistic mediums and just turns them into very simple, engaging bits of content that keep people glued to their screens. The other thing is that what you're going to end up with is AI feeding into other AI. Most recommendation algorithms these days are running on AI that are optimizing for engagement. If you're familiar with AI safety research at all, then you've probably heard the term goal misalignment. And I would argue that current recommendation algorithms have a goal misalignment. Arguably, corporations have a goal misalignment with society, but it's being reflected in the recommendation algorithms. Because they're optimizing for engagement, not enjoyment, not social advancement, none of those things, what will very quickly happen is that if you are feeding tens of thousands of AI generated novels into a recommendation algorithm, it will recommend the ones that cause the most engagement. And engagement can be caused by some very negative things. And very quickly, what happens is that the humans creating content in this sphere get pushed out. Not because their content is worse, in fact, it's probably better, but because the noise is just so high. I am very divided on this topic. I really think that we are going to, in the next little while, see a whole bunch of AI generated art in a bunch of different mediums come out through commercial means. My hope is that it will blow itself out fairly quickly, but I guess we will see. As to the AI as a tool that is being used to help amplify the other aspects of video game creation and other artistic endeavors, I hope that we will see that. I guess we will see. A special thanks to my members. They provide the resources that this channel needs to keep running. If you're interested in becoming a member, there's a link to that down in the description. We have merch now. I'm currently wearing I bought this shirt so Mark doesn't start pumping NFTs. NFT is probably going to be one of the first places where bots are just going to generate tens of thousands or millions of NFTs because the artistic bar there is relatively low. If you're interested in picking up some merch, there's a shelf below this video. What are your thoughts on AI? Are you worrying about it? Are you excited about it? A little bit of both? That's where I am at. Let me know what you're thinking down in the comments. I will see you again soon. Thank you.